When you first start using the HDR palette in DaVinci Resolve, it can be a bit overwhelming or confusing, but don't worry, I'm going to break it down in this video so you can get started with it really quickly. To switch over to the HDR palette, click this button. The HDR palette has 7 of these wheels. If you click on this first dot, it's going to go to the very first wheel, black. So we've got black, dark, shadow. If you click one of these arrows, it'll move or shuffle those wheels along. We've now got dark, shadow, light, highlight now appears, and finally specular. Including this global wheel, which affects the exposure of the entire image, we've got 7 total wheels. You can click on these dots to quickly move between them, or just use the left and right arrows to shuffle one wheel at a time. Each of these wheels has basically the same controls. We can change the color of that region using the little dot in the middle. Double click to reset, or we can use the exposure to change the exposure of that region. Double click to reset. We can also change the saturation of that region. Double click to reset. And to know what region of the image each of these individual controls is going to affect, click on these buttons at the top. So if I click and hold down this button, or this button on the dark, or this button on the shadow, you can see it's telling us what region of the image this is going to affect. And for specular, these are the brightest parts of the image. So the leftmost wheel is the darkest area of the image, and the rightmost wheel, excluding global, is the specular wheel, and this is the brightest part of the image. So all of these individual controls essentially divide an image up into different parts or different levels of brightness ranges. If you click this button, you actually get to see what those ranges are. On the left, we've got black, dark, shadow, light, highlight, and specular. And if you click on one of these, you can see in this little graph, it's telling us what areas of the image each of those controls is affecting. You can even move these around if you want to, but that's more of an advanced thing, and I don't recommend you do that when you're just starting out using the HDR palette. Click this button to get back to the wheels. So if we wanted to reduce the highlights, we could click on here just to check what they're going to affect, and then use this exposure slider to either darken the highlights or brighten the highlights. You can see what's happening in this image as I do that. We'll go to the opposite end by clicking here, and we'll change the exposure of the blacks. We'll make them really dark by moving this slider to the left, or make them brighter by moving it to the right. And you can always reset one of these individual sections by clicking the button that just reset the black. And if we wanted to just reset the highlights, we could click there. And if we wanted to reset everything that we've done in this control, click this button to reset all of the wheels. Let me show you on a real life image next, just so you can get a better idea of what's possible with this control. And let's start off with the brightest parts of the image. I'm going to click this button to show us what's going to be affected. Now you can see as I'm holding my left mouse button down, if we were to change this specular section, it's going to change the highlighted parts of the image. In this case, just the brightest parts of the clouds. I'll let go of the mouse button to get back to the image, and watch what happens in the clouds when I change the exposure control under specular. You can see that just those images are getting brightened up, or just those areas are getting darkened down. Click to reset, but let's have a look at the highlights. Hold the mouse button down on this icon, and you can see that the highlights are mostly in the sky and a little bit on my shoulders. That means if we change the highlight exposure, it's going to affect mostly those areas. So maybe we're thinking that the clouds need a bit more definition, so we can bring the darkness levels of those clouds down. Now here's one of the major disadvantages of using these HDR wheels to change exposure in the HDR palette, as opposed to something like the primary controls lift, gamma, gain, and offset. With the HDR palette, we've split the image up into multiple zones of brightness. That means it's easier for us to potentially make the image look a bit weird and for it to start to break apart. So we're currently changing the highlight value, which is affecting these clouds. And if I move this down, and it's kind of starting to look a little bit strange. And if we change the specular as well, we can kind of make things look a bit weird. Here's the light control. If we start to change things in here, we can very quickly start to make the image look really unnatural. So you need to use the HDR control a bit cautiously and just keep an eye on the overall image and the changes to the sections that you're changing to make sure things don't start to fall apart and start to look really unnatural. Although you can use the HDR palette in a more surgical way. Let me show you what I mean by that. Just going to reset all of the controls, and we've got this node. Maybe in this first node, we use the HDR palette and we use the global just to tweak tweak the exposure. Maybe we would just want to open up the brightness on the face a bit. But by doing that, we've also affected the clouds. We can add a new serial node, and in this serial node, just start to tweak the sky by maybe looking at the highlight control. Just bring the sky down just a little bit. If you go too far, things are going to start to look weird again. So in this way, we're just using this HDR palette after we've done other color grading changes, just to surgically change what's happening in the image. The more you change the exposure in each of these individual zones, the more unrealistic the image is going to start to look. Just changing the exposure using the HDR palette is not normally enough to really bring out the best in your image. And if you really want to make your colors pop in your color grades, watch this video next. I'm Jason Roberts, this is DaVinci Dojo, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Bye.